Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my buddies Neil Polachek, John Gerard, and Greg Sterling. What's up, guys? How's it going?
Hey, Andy, what's happening?
We're here.
How you doing? All right. So let's dig in. We're gonna talk about a few things today. We've got our notes from the field that we're gonna lead off with. We're gonna dig into deep research. Greg and John both dug into that. We're gonna crack that one open. New Google search with AI. There's a new tab coming. We'll talk a little bit about that. Thomson Reuters wins the first major AI copyright case in the US and what implications that may have for AI and LLMs, large language models, that is. And ChatGPT had a Super Bowl ad. They spent $14 million on it. Was it good? So let's dig into the notes from the field. Deep research is this new area that both ChatGPT and Gemini have created, and it's been all over the news. Let's dig into what practical applications you guys dug into. John, you want to lead off with that one?
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. So deep research is, I guess you would call it a product from OpenAI, a function or a mode you can turn on in ChatGPT. And what it does is it changes the way that the LLM responds to and approaches the question that you ask it. So it's really meant for situations where you want more than just the several paragraph response or an output of a resume, and you want something that actually goes out and combines multiple sources of information from the web into a cohesive whole. So the most obvious thing would be something like, for instance, an analyst report, where you want to report on the market for a certain product or service and what it looks like in various regions and who's buying it and who's selling it and what the price points are. Deep research is very, very well suited to those kinds of problems. So that's the setup. It's only available on the pro version, so you have to spend a few bucks to get it. I think it's $200 a month.
$200 a month.
$200 a month for that. And the basic format, and then we can kind of talk more about what's under the hood and why it's so interesting, is you put in your question. It seems to always ask a series of qualifying questions or follow-up questions to help direct the research. And then it goes out and spends 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or can be shorter, but generally in that range. It'll actually show you its work, which is kind of fun to watch. So it shows you where it's out there looking and what websites it's found and little insights that it's picked up and new directions that it might take in its response based on what it's finding. And in the end, you get this very long document, ChatGPT style, big wall of text that you can do whatever you want with. But very interesting, had some mixed results, but it's been pretty interesting to play around with it. And Greg, I think you played around with it quite a bit too.
Yeah, I've used it a number of times. I've also used the Google version, which is not more expensive than Google, whatever the Google Advanced, whatever the next step up from free. So you can get the Google version for $20. They're not identical, but they have the identical name, interestingly. So I don't know, John, you want to give more of your thoughts before I start giving my take on it?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll tell you what I'm intrigued by. I mean, you guys know I like sort of the technical nerding out aspects here, right? So what I'm really interested in with this is one of the first kind of more explicit versions of recursive LLM style stuff. So what do I mean by that? One of the things we've talked about as being really, really interesting about LLMs, we all know that they create great text, that they write a good sentence, and that it comes across as clear and concise, and it makes sense, and that's been a massive achievement. Much more underappreciated is the ability of these models or these systems to interpret what we write. So I can put in anything, and I can make typos, and I can use bad grammar, and it kind of understands what I'm saying. So when you have an LLM that's capable of interpreting natural language so well, and it's also capable of outputting natural language so well, guess what you can do? You can plug it into itself. So what deep research is doing very clearly is some version of an initial prompt that says, hey, you're an analyst at a major financial institution, and you are being tasked with doing market research on XYZ industry, looking at these geographies, these price points, these go-to-market strategies. If you were going to be doing this at a very high level of sophistication, what are the 23 steps that you would take in order to achieve that effectively? And it writes itself its own instructions, and then it feeds it back and it goes, okay, let's do number one. And then it uses a prompt that says, you're doing this big research. Here are the 23 steps. You're on step one, go. And it keeps iterating that way. So this idea of of connecting the output of ChatGPT to the input of a new prompt and then consolidating that all together at the end is really at the core of this stuff. And that part is really amazing. This is the beginning of what agentic AI is really all about, which is taking a simple query, translating it into a bunch of steps that are natural language, and then using those natural language steps as an input for that same engine to go and actually do the heavy lifting and do the work.
That's so interesting. Does it give you a moment to react to the instructions before it starts going into its
So no, and it's I mean, yes and no. So that those actual instructions are obfuscated. This is my interpretation of what is almost certainly happening. There's not really any other way to do it. But as is the case with a lot of what these LLMs do, the actual prompt that you put in is often augmented with a whole bunch of other stuff that, for instance, stops it from swearing and giving you information about how to make a bomb. And in this case,
that part.
we don't see that. I mean, we see the evidence of it because you can see in its little window as it's giving you updates, it says, now I'm moving on to this part of things, and I found this, that, and the other, and oh, this makes me think I'll go over here. So you see the evidence that that's the approach that they're using, but you don't see the blueprint itself.
I remember hiring interns to do this work.
Yeah, 100%.
And it would take them, they might be working on a industry analysis for a month, literally. Back then, that was in the ancient days when they had to go to the library and look stuff up. But even in more recent times, it was very time consuming. I think about all the analysts in financial institutions and all the equity analysts out there. And this would be threatening.
Those job losses are already happening on Wall Street. They're already happening.
I mean, that's a big deal that's going on that we haven't really heard much about.
In my case, I've been using both of the tools kind of side by side, but I haven't been able to really, I've been doing company research and some other things, and the output is like 25, 30 pages. It's long, it's very substantive, and it looks and feels kind of right. Like this is coherent, this is the right information. The one observation I would make is that there's a kind of randomness to the sources that are being used. They'll identify the sources that are being looked at, and some of them seem higher quality than others, and there's a kind of random quality to it. I have experimented with trying to limit the number of sources by saying, use government data, use company data, use only the highest quality data sources, very sort of general stuff like that. And that has seemed to have an impact on the sources that it uses. But one of the issues here, I think, is the sources, and being able to sort of control that will impact the quality of the output. But having said that, they're very impressive. They're very impressive.
I totally agree with that. And I did a couple of these, and I was like, well, why in the world would they rely on that information? That's bizarre. Reflecting back on my experience with analyst reports and actually both doing them and consuming them, I also know that there's a lot of areas where there's just not a whole lot of data, and you do end up picking up these sort of random sources. So it was very hard to say, as I was looking at this, like, are these really the best sources or not? One thing I think we can be sure of, all of ChatGPT, the entire LLM approach is based on approximating what a human response would be, in the sense of it's really, really, really good at faking a response, right? It does it so convincingly that we are convinced that there's a real intelligence behind it in many cases. So if your audience for this is somebody who needs to be fooled into thinking that you've done a lot of research and done a good analyst report, this is perfect. If the point of it is to truly do the research and understand a market to make a business decision, I would probably, put a little bit less weight on the outcomes of it, right? It looks beautiful and perfect and convincing. Is it? I don't know.
Is that a temporary thing, John?
That's a good question. I mean, this goes to sort of some of the questions. In a sense, what I'm saying is that this is deep research's version of hallucinations, right? So it's not that they're making up statistics; it's that they are finding them and then claiming that they're, the best, basing their arguments on those things. So Sam Altman said something really interesting about a middle layer that's emerging right now in this LLM world, which is basically people who are taking these public models and tuning them very, very carefully for specific use cases like medicine or like law or like financial, research and analysis. My guess is that when somebody, tries to tune something like deep research for that, they're going to need to they're going to need to develop something like Google did originally around PageRank, which was how do you make sense of which web resource is the most reliable and the best place to go to get something. They ended up doing that based on citations. There may be sort of an equivalent. Well, there certainly is, even at that level, but there may be an equivalent kind of an algorithm that gets put in here so that the model can know, of my choices, I'm going to prioritize these four because we think it's, for this algorithm says that they're most likely to be most valuable or useful.
But that's going to have to be done on a per domain or per industry
It's
basis.
not clear to me how it would be done, right? Where would you pick up signal about the usefulness of various data sets or the veracity? So one method is the citation method that Google did with PageRank. There are presumably other ways to do it, but I don't know what those are.
This will also be useful for in-depth research on travel products, high consideration products and purchases,
Very much so.
And I initiated a version of this on Gemini just while we were talking here in real time. And it's in the process of it. It says it's research on solar panels. My prompt was, I need an in-depth report on solar panels and what to look for when you think about buying them. And it's looking at 72 websites, and it shows you the websites in a panel. This is sort of different than ChatGPT, but similar. And there's a bunch of stuff in here that sounds pretty credible and reasonable. And there's a bunch of really fluffy stuff like NerdWallet content and other sites like that are very secondary, tertiary kind of sites that aren't going to have good information. And I think the approach here is that they take a kind of shotgun approach, just encompass a lot of information and probably distill some consensus. There's probably a process of taking too much information and then distilling it down to something that represents some kind of a consensus, if that exists. Because there's going to be commonalities in all of these things. I'm just totally speculating on that.
Did you guys give it a context window? And like John, you started out the conversation saying that you're the smartest analyst in a particular category.
Well, I didn't have to give it the context window. That was my guess about what it is building behind the scenes as a prompt to itself in constructing, the is kicking off the recursion, right?
Right.
And I don't know that it's doing that context window. I'm 98% sure that it's doing what would the 15 steps be. That's the same way the coding agents work, by the way. So the coding agents started as like being able to solve a very discrete problem. Look at this line of code and tell me what's wrong with it. And then they got to the point of like, hey, I need a little, we did it on a previous episode, create a game for me. Well, when those agents are doing that, they say, you're a developer, you're developing something in Python. It's a game that does this. give me the 17 steps in order to develop that, and then we'll step out, through them one by one. That method is what's used there, and so it's it's got to be used here too. To this question of like source prioritization or veracity or whatever, we've talked about this a little bit before too. So maybe the LLMs and the search algorithms that do the web agent sort of components for LLMs, utilize the same basic ranking algorithms that have given rise to an entire industry, which is SEO, which based on that sort of page rank and citation and keyword stuff. But maybe they don't, and I think we even speculated about this before. It might be that you end up with something like what would you call that? Like LSO, like LLM search optimization, as opposed to SEO.
Yeah, they're calling AEO is kind of like the new.
Okay, so it's okay. I just didn't know what it was.
I mean, I've seen AEO used most frequently. It's kind of outdated, but
Yeah. I know that doesn't have a good ring to it. I like
it's like old McDonald had a farm, right?
Wouldn't it rely on the same links? Sort of, it goes out there and it's looking at all these links, and can it understand which of those links are better than other links?
Google doesn't understand content. It looks for proxies for quality.
That's right.
Initially, that was other sites linking
to that site.
So that site, because that was the vote of authority. Then that got gamed by the SEO world, and they've had to expand. And so there's all these other signals. And one of those signals is clicks and user engagement, but there are tons of signals. And so, to the extent that AI can actually understand the content of a page, then it could potentially make assessments like that. But I don't know how it would do that in real time with hundreds and hundreds of sites. Maybe it could.
Yeah, I don't know either. But that's a really great point, which is, Google uses proxies rather than the actual content for the most part. Presumably, they're changing that now in the world of LLMs. But they were kind of really and truly blind to what is actually going on. It's sort of all algorithmic. Like, when somebody searches for Barack Obama, well, here's the page with the most links to it. Therefore, and it just happens that it's Barack Obama's Wikipedia page because, yes, that's the page that most people link to. But they really had no concept at all about, President of the United States.
But that was the genius insight, though. The Google came along at a time when the number of web pages was getting, humans couldn't manage it anymore. I mean, there was the Yahoo directory, which was human curated and edited,
unbelievable.
And there had been search engines, but Google's innovation was we can look at ranking through the lens of this sort of crowdsourcing, what other people already think is more valuable content.
That's right.
And that was their insight, and then whatever sort of technical stuff they did on the back end to make it fast. And that's become more and more elaborate and sophisticated over time, and more bloated and all of that.
Yeah,
but that was
presumably a good segue into our next topic, which is the new Google search with AI. Greg, it sounds like they're going to have a new tab. Let's talk a little bit about that and what that experience is going to be like.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. So Google obviously has been trying to compete with ChatGPT with these AI overviews, which appear at the top of normal search results, and they're kind of what have been called featured snippets. They're kind of like that, but much larger, right? It's an answer to your question. Is it okay for me to give my dog chocolate? And then boom, you get a long answer that has some citations and then the sources on the right, so you can click them and go through to the original source material. They don't appear for every search query. They appear in different levels of frequency for different categories. But nonetheless, this has been Google's bid to compete with ChatGPT, other than Gemini, right? But most people aren't using Gemini. So Google now is going to introduce what's called, this is still sort of speculative a little bit, AI mode, which apparently, according to reports that I've seen, going to be a button or a filter that exists on the top nav next to news, images, shopping, etc., and the Google search results. You do your query, you get the result, and then you can hit AI mode and move over to a blank page, essentially a new canvas that will allow you to interact with that content in the same way you would on Gemini or ChatGPT. So you can ask follow-up questions, you can riff on it, you know, something you can't do in the traditional search results page today. And that's going to be a way for them to bring together search and AI. And if you think about the addition of deep research and these reasoning capabilities, they have a new reasoning model. It really changes the nature of search interaction. And it remains to be seen. First of all, it remains to be seen if this shows up in the way that I'm describing. But then secondly, if it does, how this is going to impact search behavior. Are people going to toggle back and forth? Are they going to start their queries on the AI mode and then go over to Google to make purchases or to click through to websites? Presumably there'll be links on the AI mode page. So it's pretty interesting to speculate about.
What about all that monetization that goes on in?
Well, obviously, I mean, Google is trying to sort of thread the needle between presenting a more robust AI conversational experience and not killing the, whatever metaphor you want to choose, the golden goose, the golden calf, the, money machine.
I can see them having a right rail where, it's thematic, whatever you're typing about, that
There'll be ads.
stream of ads just start to appear based on what you're talking about, so that
For sure. There'll definitely be ads there, but will people be clicking as many? People have been clicking on things less over time because Google is providing more and more answers and more different kinds of content. Previously, people would have to click through to the website to get the information. Now that's less true. But and what the promise of this is that you can really shorten the customer journey. You can start out looking for solar panels. So I need to know, whatever is my example. I don't know anything about solar panels. Tell me what I need to know to buy solar panels. And then you get this whole very elaborate AI answer. And then you can say, well, what are the best brands, or what panels have the most capacity, or whatever. And you can get all the way to a local installer, right? And that could be done in 1 or 2 sessions, maybe a single session, and then you can contact that person. Whereas previously, something like that would have taken you multiple sessions over a period of time, where you have to assimilate the information and whatever. This can really accelerate. I mean, this is a very complicated purchase, but this can really accelerate the customer journey, going from information to transaction in a much more compressed time frame. I think that's one of the things that we'll see happen. And I think what Google thinks is that you'll do all this informational research, then you'll go over to Google to click on the particular vendor, or to find 3 providers, or to make the reservation or buy the thing online, whatever it is.
Yeah, or they just might present it to you right there,
Right there. Right, yeah.
which is pretty fascinating if you think about it from a direct response standpoint. It's like a lead qualifier, right? Like which is the holy grail for any business that is buying clicks or buying leads, or any kind of lead generation, customer acquisition effort. You want to get people as deep in the funnel as possible, so that they're ready to transact, because those clicks are going to convert better. So, that makes a lot of sense. And I could see how Google could turn that into that type of a presentation for advertisers, and even maybe charge more for those ads, because they're doing all the lead qualification.
How much further down?
Yeah, they're going from discovery all the way to deeper in the funnel to say, I'm now ready to transact. In fact, I could even see Google just saying, hey, if you want to be an advertiser and you want to just integrate your whole purchase funnel into our system, we'll take the transaction for you using Google Wallet, and just click and buy, and you're good to go.
Yeah. I'm super interested in, so like, before this was all happening, of course, there was another form of algorithmic suggesting around what the best product is if you're searching for a product, and that related to the page rank stuff that we talked about, and of course the competition for ads, which in a weird way actually tends to surface top products, because if your product is good enough that you make enough money on it to afford a budget, there's sort of that whatever, and the ethics of that have been Google still needs to disclose when it's an advertiser there. And I think that people are mostly used to this idea that this is imperfect, but it's a reasonable proxy for value, is to sort of see what shows up on the first page, top of the ads, and the first or second result, page result. I don't know that we have as strong, to our earlier point, I don't know that we have as strong a filter in the AI generated responses around value, or around how effective a product is. I don't know that AI is quite as good, but it's very good at being convincing that it is telling you that these are the best ones. Like the few times that I've done this, I just sort of asking on a search basis, it will give me a list and say, these are the top 5 in the category, and here's why they're the best. And you really can't find anywhere else in the web that would echo that sentiment, either in a Google search result or going to G2 or in any other product list. So it'll be interesting to see, do they caveat this? Do they in the same way they had to flag stuff that, this is from a sponsor? Do they say this is AI generated? Do they find other ways of making sure that the top recommendations are actually top? I don't know if
Well,
they do that.
they have a generic, and ChatGPT does this. They have a generic disclaimer: Gemini can make mistakes, so double check it.
Yeah.
Which is small, small print, right?
It's the equivalent of the "don't forward this email if you got it, accidentally," which is like, since everybody includes it, nobody pays attention to it.
Yeah.
Where do stars and reviews fit into all this?
So interestingly, I did a search on Gemini. This was not on, I don't have access to AI mode. This was just Gemini. And they have a model which is called, they have too many models here, which will all be collapsed into one, you would assume. 2.0 Flash, thinking experimental with apps, reasoning across YouTube, maps, and search. So you can do local searches there. And I was doing some of those, and you can, it'll give you, you can ask really elaborate questions. I need a handyman that can fix this and 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 this. And then it'll go through and it'll produce some names in my area, and you don't know, to John's point, you don't know if these are the best qualified, or, where these folks stand, but you can say stuff like, oh, I want people that are only rated at least 4-point fill in the blank on Google Maps. And I want people who have at least some number of reviews. Now, in that example, it complied. It gave me, it whittled down the list. But then when I clicked through, some of that was wrong. It gave me an answer that didn't conform to my criteria. Like, it was rated at the right level, but it didn't have enough reviews. But you can ask those kinds of questions. I want a hotel that has only 4.5 stars and is within walking distance of the city center and costs less than $300 a night and has a gym on site and da 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 da. You can do that kind of stuff, which you can't really do in search right now.
So won't it figure that out and realize that to do those, to deliver back a result, it's got to have to pick above a 4-point something? You won't even have to tell it at some point. It's just going to pick.
That's a natural progression.
I want anything that's above a 2. I mean, I'm not going to pick you a 2.0 starred place.
Well, right. It'll give you something above a 4, probably. It'll default to that, I suspect, unless it doesn't exist.
When you guys were doing your research, did you do any competitive research or use it for those purposes at all, or kind of get an idea of, is it good at competitive research? Like,
you mean here's a company, who are the competitors and how?
Yeah, like companies want that all the time, right? And that could be a really interesting use case for how you stack up.
Yes, the answer is yes, and it did provide information, and it did do kind of SWOT analysis or whatever, like, this one is better for this reason, this has these advantages. Yes, it'll do that kind of research, but to John's earlier point, it's very convincing. It's not entirely clear if the underlying information is great. It looks really good. It's like, oh, it did this, it did all this, and it does have the requested comparisons, and it'll produce matrices, with features and benefits or with capabilities. But you don't really know if it's accurate, unless you really dive into it and you just immerse yourself and enough about the the underlying sector or the underlying subject matter to kind of tell. And my way of doing this now is to use two different models and see where there's agreement and disagreement and try and get a consensus.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I did this in a couple areas where I kind of knew what the landscape was and it was mediocre. And so that kind of made me a little bit dubious about that aspect. And likewise, I mean, the other area where I was kind of hopeful that it would be very useful but it's hopeful but doubtful, I guess I should say, was assembling data sets, right? So I was thinking about, like, is this going at some point to be a substitute for a lead gen or contact data sourcing tool? And the answer is no in the short term. It isn't really good at going out and sort of finding resources or compiling them on the fly, which would be very interesting, but also very, very expensive from a crawling perspective. So, there's no reason you couldn't have an agent that actually was going out, creating a list of all the companies in a space, going to every website, scraping all the executive information, making guesses about what their email addresses were, that kind of thing. It isn't really put together in a way. I suspect it's kind of hobbled on the back end from doing that kind of thing right now.
My question is about accuracy and how important is that? I mean, you two guys, well, it depends. It doesn't always have to be perfect information, because even that intern that I hired years ago didn't come back with perfect information. It doesn't exist. But, was it good enough to understand the marketplace? Was it good enough to understand an industry? Yeah, it was really what you're using the information for. If you're going to make a purchase of a company, that's very different than if you're going to track a company and just understand what that company's up to.
I think these tools are very good to sort of sensitize you and make you aware of the universe of considerations and issues, and to give you a kind of a basic primer on things. And then depending on whatever degree of accuracy you need, you can then go on and add your human intelligence to it. But if you just want to be educated, like on my solar panel example, if I want to get educated about the things I need to know to make a better buying decision about solar panels, this works really well, because it'll tell me all the things that people have talked about out there that I should be sensitive to, and then I can ask smarter questions, and it can bring me up to speed, very, very quickly.
Right, Mr. Skeptic himself.
Me, Mr. Skeptic, yes.
Well, what's interesting about that also is that, and this leads into our next topic, which is oftentimes they're using copyrighted material to be able to present that information, right? And this week there was what could be a landmark case with Thomson Reuters, where they won their first AI copyright case in the U.S. What happened on that front this week?
Right. So this is the first, as I understand it, this is the first major AI copyright case in the United States to get decided, to get an opinion, to get a ruling, and which is sort of strange, since there are a bunch of copyright cases, I guess, working their way through the courts. This was Thomson Reuters, which is the owner of a service called Westlaw Nexus. I think they own LexisNexis. Yeah, Westlaw was a competitive product with LexisNexis at one point, but that doesn't matter. They owned a legal research tool called Westlaw, and this other company called Ross Intelligence, which was a legal AI startup, trained its AI on that Thomson Reuters proprietary database. And then Thomson Reuters sued them for copyright infringement. And it went to court, and Ross Intelligence lost. And they lost across the board. There was nothing that they won on. And the important part is that one of the issues litigated in the case was this fair use question. Fair use is a defense against copyright infringement. It's somebody sues you and then you raise the defense fair use. Well, I didn't infringe because I was entitled to use your information for these reasons. And it's a laundry list of reasons where fair use can be invoked. And the court rejected that, and they said we reject this because what you were trying to do, Ross Intelligence, is build a competitive product that you were going to charge money for and that was going to compete with the product that you basically plagiarized in order to build your product, which is identical to the DeepSeek situation, identical to these sort of distilled models that have been in vogue lately and that people have been discussing. So there are potentially major implications here because all of the big companies that are crawling the web and using copyrighted material as part of their data sets are saying, well, this is really fair use. It's online somewhere, so it's fair use, which is a bad faith statement to begin with. But now I think there's gonna be pressure to do more licensing. We'll see. There are going to be other cases that come down, but this is the first one, and it's good for copyright owners.
Won't other cases look to this new case law as precedent now?
Well, so I think this had to be in federal court. I have the opinion somewhere. I think copyright is inherently in federal court. I don't know if you can bring copyright cases in state court. Yes, it's the District Court of Delaware. And so the way that precedent works is there's federal court system, state court system. This would be federal. So yes, there's three levels. There's the district court, there's the appellate court, and then there's the Supreme Court. And so at the district court, it's what's called persuasive opinion. So if you're in another district, you can rule in the opposite direction and you could ignore the precedent, but then it's up to the district court to reconcile the two, or the Supreme Court to reconcile the competing. I'm getting too much into legal procedure. But yes, Neil, they will look to this case as persuasive.
It's a starting.
Yes, they'll say this will be very persuasive to other courts around the fair use question. But fair use is a case-by-case analysis. You have to look at the particular circumstances of the facts and make a determination. Does this fall into one of these fair use categories? You can't just say on its face, this is not fair use, this is fair use. But yes, you're right. It will be persuasive to other courts.
Yeah, and then the question is,
sorry about that whole digression into legal procedure.
It sounds like you got a law degree on the side here this last few weeks. That was impressive.
Got a law degree in 1990. So yeah. I was a lawyer for 10 years, but not an IP lawyer.
Oh, well, goodness. Okay, there it is then. So I think the question which we've raised before is, does this actually do anything to curb the behavior of the companies that are slurping this stuff up and doing something to it? And there, there's sort of two forms in which you might ask that. One is, unless the penalties are like, an injunction or you're out of business, then, maybe they just pay it as a cost of doing business. And then the second is the jurisdiction question. Like, when these things get, sticky enough, somebody offshore will handle this. I mean, you can bet that, that China is slurping up the same stuff and processing it the same way. And, is this really going to impact anybody in China who's working on this? No. So this is going to be an interesting question. I think it's probably important, but I don't think that it is particularly precedent setting or enforceable over the long term. Or
as a practical matter, you're saying it's hard to enforce.
I think so. I mean, I unless I'm missing something, like I think it ends up being.
Might even curb U.S. companies. If you have companies in China that are going that aren't governed by, there's no ceiling, for those guys, and then here in the U.S. there's a ceiling because of this. What does that do to the innovation that may happen? It's a strange conundrum because on the one hand they're stealing IP, right? And so like there has to be some sort of recourse for that. But John, you're right. On a practical basis, if there's no ceiling for other companies, DeepSeek and others, how does that play out in the long run?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of what these companies do is beg for forgiveness. They'll do the thing and then the penalty is the cost of doing business, something like that. And so that's one approach if you're big enough and if you're an author, there's a class action with a group of authors, I believe. and there's a couple others, artists. There was proving it is hard. I think proving it is very difficult. That's where I think a lot of these cases will break down. But previously in the case involving Getty images, I think can't remember who the precise defendant was there. The Getty image logo was reproduced in the images that were being produced by the AI. So that was pretty smoking gun like, right? We know you've ripped us off because here's our logo. Here's a distorted version of our logo in your images. Right. So watermarking exactly, and other kinds of things like that will probably be included to prevent this in the future and to set up litigation. If this precedent is established and holds, and people can sue for damages or get an injunction, you'll see that kind of thing happening. But there's no recourse against, maybe in Europe, but in certain other places, there's no recourse against governments and companies that are not bound by these kinds of copyright agreements.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
We'll have to see, but it's a big deal.
Yeah, curious to see how this New York Times lawsuit plays out.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's switch gears and talk about the ChatGPT Super Bowl ad. That was, what'd you say, Greg? It was $14 million spent on that?
Something like that. So each 30-second spot was
$8 million. So it's 16.
Well, it was some big number. It was like let's say it was north of 15 million, and 14, 15 million plus whatever other ancillary, the agency that created it, all of that. So they probably spent something approaching 20 million.
AI created it, Greg. They didn't have an agency create it. And
well, that's the irony. I suspect this was not created by AI. This was not. Yeah. This was probably created.
The interesting thing to know, wouldn't it? I don't think we know the answer to that. New York Times written it as the #1 Super Bowl ad.
Yeah,
and followed.
I suspect if they had done it in Sora, I mean, that was the sub headline that didn't make it to press. Is OpenAI either didn't do it with Sora or did it and didn't say anything about it, which is very unlikely. And what's up with that?
Yeah. So what did you guys think? Did you like it? Did you think it was effective? What are your guys' thoughts?
Well, I couldn't hear it because I was at a party, so I only saw it. And then when I watched it with the sound, it was even better.
So I liked it.
I liked it. I liked it better with the sound too.
Why did you like it?
I didn't know what it was for when I first saw it, because I thought it was for Apple. I thought it was an Apple ad,
which is a great compliment because they do typically really good ads.
I thought it was, and what was it? The tagline: progress, something didn't start, has to start somewhere.
See, if you can't remember it, then maybe.
No, I think progress has to start somewhere, which I thought was pretty good tagline for it.
What happens in the boardroom when they're talking about the tagline? And yeah, I guess the Hall of Fame tagline is "Think Different" with Apple. So
or Nike, right? Just do it, and their new arguably the best ad was the Nike ad.
I thought it was a great ad.
So the Nike ad, not to digress too far down this path, had a new slogan called "So Win," and it was about women in sports, and it was a sort of a rebuke to the wave of anti-feminist thinking and opportunity that's going on right now. And it was these female athletes that you recognize.
Oh yeah,
that were like kicking ass. It was black and white. It was a great, just beautiful photography, and it was saying, so they won't let you do this, blah 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 blah. So win. It was like just go out and prove to these detractors that you're qualified, capable, and it was a kind of call to arms. It was a very powerful ad. But anyway, yeah, it was a very powerful ad. I would say that was the best ad of the Super Bowl, but that's my.
Two of them were really good.
And the ChatGPT ad was very good because it was sort of aesthetically engaging. It without telling a story in a traditional sense, it kind of drew you into the ad and had a little bit of a storyline. You were kind of curious to see where the images would go.
Well, and what it was for. I mean,
And people who don't know ChatGPT didn't know what it was for. And I looked at Google Trends after the fact, and Gemini also had an ad. Gemini also had Google had a couple of ads, and Gemini had a specific ad.
Odd Island oysters.
Gemini did not get a bump, but ChatGPT got a bump. And yeah, I can show you that. I don't have it teed up, otherwise I would show it on the screen here. And one of the major queries was, what is ChatGPT? So
and that ad worked. They got their money's worth for sure.
It created, well, we'll see how you will see, but it built awareness, and it created a certain curiosity that then people followed up with Google, ironically, to try and figure out what it was. So I think it was a pretty effective ad. Many Super Bowl ads are not effective. Tell us why you didn't like it.
So here's what I don't like about these $14-16 million ads, right? Is you're spending all this money and all this time to try to capture mind share just in that 30 seconds or minute. Why in the world do you not have a QR code on your ad? Like, I just don't get it. You're
Just download the app or something.
Are you above it? Is it like is it like, oh, we wouldn't ever do that? Well, Coinbase did that a few years ago, or what's the Staples Center called now? What's a company? I can't remember the
Crypto
Arena. Yeah. So crypto.com did that ad a few years ago, and it brought down their servers because they had a QR code on it.
Oh no, it was Coinbase, I think.
Oh, was it Coinbase? Yeah,
I think it was Coinbase. Yeah.
So anyway, I guess it goes to show how effective that ad was. But
well, no, but you're right. It creates enormous awareness, and then it creates a direct response component, which is arguably a missing piece. I agree with you.
I don't understand. If you are spending that kind of dough, why would you not have a persistent QR on 60 seconds so that you can get your phone ready, you can pull it out, you take a picture of that and have another ad, another experience after that. Whatever that experience is, doesn't have to be like to a registration page or whatever. It can just be a completely different experience at that point. It could be a game. It could be whatever that pulls you in. It captures more of your mind share. And when you're doing that, then you're really going to see a bump, I would imagine, more so than not having that.
Well, interestingly, Perplexity did a tweet on Twitter /X during the game where I wish I had it queued up, where they got some massive number of app installs as a result of that. So this was people, I guess, who had Twitter on their phone watching the game, and it said, we don't have a Super Bowl ad, but I forget what the copy was, but it was the CEO, but download our app or something. It was some call to action like that.
They tagged ChatGPT or something like that, so it show up in the feed or whatever. That conquest kind of thing is great.
There was only one clear direct response ad in that whole Super Bowl suite of ads. And it was for, I can't remember what it was for. It was for, I don't know.
Yeah, see, it doesn't work.
I like, if you have a TV ad and you're spending all that money doing it, have a QR code up there. Let people engage with your brand.
There was a great ad for Rocket Mortgage. And not to be religious here, there was a great ad for the group that does Jesus Loves Me. Or
he gets us. That was Janine Pirro's favorite ad, the Fox commentator of the Super Bowl. So you're in good company with her there, Neil.
I was just impressed that Jesus had such a big budget. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So, by the way, the answer on the QR code thing, I think, is really that most of these decisions are not rational, right? Like, if you look at any of this, it's the creative director who says, like, I'm going to go on a murderous rampage. Whoever going to override that person, you can't have the political will, no matter how much of an improvement it creates. And there's actually no way to test if it's going to improve it, because it's not like you're going to split test it and send a QR code to half the audience and no QR code to the other half. This is classic, like, American advertising.
So what happens now is that people go to YouTube and watch all the ads, or they go to these ad roundups, Ad Week and Ad Age do these best of roundups. and you could put a QR code on your ad that shows up on YouTube after the fact. So they see it during the game, and then when they go to look at it a second time, they get a QR code on it. So just a quick addendum to the Perplexity story. So he said, if you download the app, the CEO said, if you download the app and you ask 5 questions during the game, we'll enter you into $1 million drawing. So there was a clear incentive there. And so they got some enormous volume of app installs. The number was something like they increased app installs by 50%, which I think I said before. So it would for $1 million, right? I mean, ChatGPT is spending 14, 15, 16 million, whatever. So they spent $1 million and they got, it's customer acquisition, right?
Yeah. I don't love Perplexity, but I think they won. That was good.
Yeah.
I think they won the Super Bowl.
Well, all right. Well, that was great. Let's wrap it up for here. Thanks so much, guys. Great conversation. Thanks everybody for listening. And we'll catch you next week with more news on what's going on in the world of AI.
All right. See you later, everybody.
See you guys.
Everybody.